My name is Leona Bailey. I'm 58 years old, and until 3 weeks ago I thought being a good mother meant saying yes to everything. I thought love was measured in how much you could sacrifice, how small you could make yourself, how quietly you could disappear into the background of your own family's life. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was especially wrong about Christmas morning when I woke up alone in my daughter's house, listening to her golden retriever Max whimpering by the back door, while she and her husband were sipping mimosas at a five-star resort in Cabo. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That morning, staring at the pile of expensive dog toys under their perfectly decorated tree, something inside me finally cracked open. Not broke, cracked open. Like an egg that's been waiting to hatch for decades. What came out wasn't pretty or polite or motherly in the way I'd been trained to be. What came out was angry and tired and done with being convenient. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a woman who spent 30 years being the family's emotional ATM finally decided to close the account. The phone call came on December 15th, 10 days before Christmas. I was in my small apartment in Portland, wrapping presents I couldn't really afford for people who probably wouldn't notice if I didn't show up. The caller ID said Chelsea, and my heart did that little flutter it always did when my only child called. Even at 32, married with a beautiful home in the suburbs, Chelsea still had the power to make me feel like I was failing her somehow. "Mom, I have the most amazing news," she said, her voice bright with that particular excitement that always seemed to cost me something. "Jake surprised me with a trip to Cabo for Christmas. Can you believe it? 7 days at the Esperanza Resort. I've been dying to go there forever." I sat down slowly, the roll of wrapping paper crinkling in my lap. "That sounds wonderful, honey. When do you leave?" "Christmas Eve morning. That's actually why I'm calling." Her tone shifted, becoming that careful, coaxing voice she used when she wanted something. "We need someone to watch Max. And you know how he gets with strangers. He adores you, and I thought maybe you could stay at our place. It would actually be perfect, because you'd have a real Christmas morning instead of being alone in that tiny apartment." I looked around my studio apartment, with its single window overlooking the parking lot, and the small artificial tree I'd bought at a drugstore. She wasn't wrong about it being tiny, but it was mine. Every dish, every book, every chipped mug had been chosen by me, paid for by me, arranged the way I wanted it. After the divorce 5 years ago, this little space had felt like freedom. "I don't want to impose," I said, which was what I always said when Chelsea offered me things that weren't really offers. "You're not imposing, you're helping us out. And honestly, Mom, it would make me feel so much better knowing you're somewhere nice for Christmas instead of—" She trailed off, but I heard the rest. "Instead of alone. Instead of in that sad little place. Instead of being a reminder that some people's lives don't turn out the way they planned." I could have said no. I could have told her I had plans, that I was perfectly happy spending Christmas reading a good book and making myself a small but elegant dinner. I could have mentioned that I'd already bought groceries, that I'd promised my neighbor Mrs. Chen I'd check on her cat. But I didn't say any of those things, because somewhere deep in my chest lived a little girl who still wanted to be needed by her daughter, even if it was just as a pet sitter. "Of course," I heard myself saying, "I'd be happy to watch Max. You're the best, Mom. I'll text you all the details. Oh, and don't worry about food or anything. The house is fully stocked. Just make yourself at home. Make yourself at home, in someone else's house, watching someone else's dog, while they lived someone else's vacation." It occurred to me as I hung up the phone that I hadn't had a real Christmas in years. Not since Chelsea was small and still believed in magic, still wanted to wake up early and tear through presents while I made pancakes in my bathrobe. Now Christmas was something that happened to other people while I facilitated it from the sidelines. I packed my small suitcase that night, folding my clothes carefully around the presents I'd wrapped for Chelsea and Jake. A cashmere scarf for her that had cost me 2 weeks of grocery money. A book about craft brewing for him, because he'd mentioned once that he was interested in making beer, though I'd never seen any evidence of this hobby in their pristine house. I added a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come, and a small wrapped gift for Max, a stupid plush toy shaped like a Christmas tree that squeaked when you pressed it. The next morning I took the bus across town to their neighborhood, a place where every house looked like it had been styled for a magazine. Chelsea and Jake's home was a two-story craftsman with a perfect lawn and a driveway that never seemed to have leaves on it. I'd been here dozens of times, but I always felt like I needed to wipe my feet extra carefully, like I was tracking something invisible and unwelcome across their threshold. Chelsea met me at the door in yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly electricity bill. She was glowing in that way people do when they're about to escape to paradise, her blonde hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that had somehow taken 20 minutes to achieve. "Mom, perfect timing. Come in. I'm just finishing up some last-minute packing." I followed her inside, pulling my wheeled suitcase across the hardwood floors. Max, a golden retriever with a coat that gleamed like he'd been polished, bounded over to greet me with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't experienced from another living being in months. At least someone was genuinely happy to see me. "So here's the deal," Chelsea said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what looked like a very detailed list. "Max gets fed twice a day, morning and evening. His food is in the pantry. He needs a walk after each meal, and there's a longer walk around the neighborhood in the afternoon. He's not supposed to have table scraps, but he's been begging a lot lately, so just ignore him when he gives you those options." She rattled off a dozen more instructions while I nodded and tried to keep track. Which veterinarian to call, which neighbor had a spare key, how to work the alarm system, where to find the dog waste bags. It was like being briefed for a job I wasn't getting paid for. Jake appeared in the hallway, dragging a suitcase that looked like it could hold my entire wardrobe. He was a nice enough man, an accountant with thinning hair and a careful smile, the kind of person who always seemed to be calculating something just behind his eye. "Leona, thanks so much for doing this," he said, giving me a quick, efficient hug. "We really appreciate it. Chelsea's been so stressed with work lately. She needs this break." I wanted to ask what Chelsea did that was so stressful. She worked part-time as a marketing coordinator for a dental practice, the kind of job that seemed to involve a lot of social media posts and very few actual demands. But I kept my mouth shut, because I'd learned that questioning my daughter's life choices was the fastest way to ensure I didn't get invited to participate in them. "It's no problem at all," I said, scratching Max behind the ears. "We'll have a good time, won't we, boy?" "There's plenty of food in the fridge," Chelsea said, still scrolling through her phone, "and the guest room is all set up for you. Clean towels in the bathroom, extra blankets in the closet. Oh, and Mom," she looked up at me with that bright, careful smile, "try not to change anything too much while we're gone, okay? Jake gets weird about his routine when he comes back. Try not to change anything. Don't leave a trace of yourself behind. Be invisible, be grateful, be convenient." I nodded and smiled because that's what I did, what I'd always done. Their Uber arrived 10 minutes later, and suddenly the house was quiet, except for the sound of Max's tail thumping against the coffee table. I stood in the entryway for a long moment, looking around at their perfect home with its neutral colors and carefully arranged furniture. Nothing was out of place, nothing was personal enough to be messy. It looked like a display house, beautiful and cold and utterly without soul. I wheeled my suitcase to the guest room, a pleasant space, decorated in shades of beige and cream with a queen-sized bed that had probably never been slept in. There were no family photos on the dresser, no books on the nightstand, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here. The ensuite bathroom was stocked with expensive toiletries that smelled like a spa, all lined up in perfect rows like soldiers awaiting inspection. I unpacked my few things, hanging my 3 dresses in the walk-in closet that was bigger than my kitchen. My clothes looked lonely in there, like they were hiding from something. I placed my book on the nightstand, and immediately felt like I was contaminating the space with evidence of my presence. The first few days passed quiet. I established a routine with Max, who turned out to be excellent company. He was patient with my slower pace, happy to sit beside me while I read, and grateful for the extra attention. We took long walks through the neighborhood, where I marveled at houses that looked like they'd been designed by people who'd never experienced financial anxiety. Every lawn was perfect, Every car was less than 3 years old. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Every Christmas display looked like it had been installed by professionals. I cooked simple meals for myself, careful to replace anything I used from their well-stocked pantry. I watched their enormous television, scrolled through their Netflix account, and tried to feel grateful for the temporary upgrade in my living situation. But mostly I felt like I was house-sitting my own life, waiting for the real occupants to return so things could go back to normal. Chelsea texted me pictures from Cabo, sunset dinners, couples massages, cocktails by the infinity pool. She looked radiant, relaxed in a way I couldn't remember seeing her since she was a child. I was happy for her, genuinely happy, but each photo felt like a small reminder of how different our lives had become. While she was living her best life in paradise, I was walking her dog and trying not to use too much of her expensive hand soap. Christmas Eve arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland winter weather that made everything feel muted and sad. I took Max for his morning walk, then settled in to wrap the last few presents I'd brought. The house felt even emptier than usual, echoing with the absence of family and tradition. I'd brought ingredients to make Christmas cookies, thinking it might be nice to have something homemade in this perfect, sterile environment, but I couldn't bring myself to mess up their immaculate kitchen. Instead, I sat on their expensive couch with Max's head in my lap, and tried to remember what Christmas used to feel like. Before the divorce, before Chelsea grew up and moved away, before I became the kind of person who got invited to watch dogs while other people lived their lives. I used to love Christmas, used to throw parties and bake for weeks and wrap presents until my fingers were raw from paper cuts. I used to matter during the holidays. That evening, Chelsea called via video chat from what looked like a restaurant overlooking the ocean. She was wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, her skin golden from 2 days in the sun. "Mom, how's everything going? How's my baby boy?" I angled the phone so she could see Max, who lifted his head lazily but didn't seem particularly excited to see his owner on a screen. "He's been wonderful," I said. "We've been having a nice time together." Good, good. I was worried he might be moping around without us. "Oh, Mom, you should see this place. It's absolutely incredible. We had the most amazing massage today, and tomorrow we're going deep-sea fishing." Jake's never done that before. I listened to her describe her adventures while I sat in her living room in my oldest sweater, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. She looked so happy, so carefree, and I tried to feel nothing but joy for her good fortune. "What are you doing for Christmas dinner?" she asked, and for a moment I thought she might be feeling guilty about leaving me alone. "Oh, I'll figure something out," I said. "There's plenty of food here." "Good. Don't go to too much trouble though. It's just you, just the woman who gave birth to you, raised you, sacrificed her career and her marriage, and her dreams to make sure you had everything you needed. Just me." "Of course," I said. "Have a wonderful time, sweetheart." After she hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness with Max, listening to the rain against the windows. The house felt like a museum after hours, beautiful and empty and full of things I wasn't supposed to touch. I thought about my own apartment, small and cluttered and imperfect, and for the first time since I'd arrived I missed it desperately. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, the kind of weather that makes everything look crisp and hopeful. I woke up in the guest bed, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the sound of Max padding around downstairs. For a moment, I felt a flutter of the old Christmas excitement, the feeling I used to get as a child when anything seemed possible. I made coffee in their expensive machine, grateful that I'd figured out how to use it without breaking anything, and took Max out for his morning constitutional. The neighborhood was quiet, everyone inside with their families, opening presents and making memories. A few houses had cars in the driveways I didn't recognize, relatives visiting for the holiday. I felt like a ghost walking through someone else's Christmas morning. When we got back inside, I saw the pile of presents under their tree, beautifully wrapped packages that Chelsea and Jake would open when they returned. My own modest gifts looked small and sad by comparison, but I added them to the pile anyway. At least there would be something waiting for them when they got home. I made myself breakfast, a simple scramble with toast, and ate it standing at their kitchen island while Max watched hopefully for dropped crumb. Their refrigerator was covered with photos held up by decorative magnets, vacation pictures and dinner party snapshots that told the story of a life well lived. I wasn't in any of them. That's when I noticed the mail, a stack of envelopes on the counter that must have arrived yesterday while I was out walking Max. Bills, catalogs, and there at the bottom, something that made my blood freeze in my veins. A mortgage statement. I shouldn't have looked. It wasn't my business, wasn't my house, wasn't my life. But the envelope was partially open, and I could see numbers, and before I could stop myself, I was reading their monthly payment amount, $4,750. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands and read it again. Their monthly mortgage payment was more than I made in 2 months at my part-time job at the library, more than my entire monthly budget including rent, utilities, groceries and my ancient car payment. I thought about my own apartment, the studio I'd been so proud of securing after the divorce, with its $1,200 monthly rent, that still sometimes kept me awake at night wondering how I'd manage it. I thought about the cashmere scarf I'd bought Chelsea, the money I'd skipped meals to save, the Christmas presents that had maxed out my credit card. I thought about my daughter sipping cocktails in Cabo while I house sat her life, grateful for the privilege of sleeping in her guest room and walking her dog. Something shifted inside me then, like a gear that had been stuck finally clicking into place. I stood in that perfect kitchen, surrounded by evidence of a life I could never afford, holding a mortgage statement that represented more money than I'd see in months, and I started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, not a bitter laugh, but the kind of laugh that comes when you finally understand a joke that everyone else has been in on for years. I was the joke. I'd been the joke for a very long time. I walked to their home office, a room I'd only glimpsed in passing, and turned on their computer. It occurred to me that I didn't even know their Wi-Fi password, but it was saved automatically, another small luxury of their convenient life. I opened their bank account. Chelsea had asked me to check it once months ago when she was traveling, and wanted to make sure a payment had gone through, and she'd never changed the password. The numbers on the screen made my head spin. Their checking account balance was more than I'd made in the last year. Their savings account was more than I'd made in the last 3 years. They had investment accounts, retirement funds, money market accounts with balances that looked like phone numbers to me. And there, in their recent transactions, was the charge for their Cabo vacation, $7,418 for a week-long trip, charged to a credit card without a second thought. I closed the computer and walked back to the kitchen, my mind reeling. Max followed me, sensing something had changed, pressing his warm body against my legs, as if he could comfort away whatever had shifted in the atmosphere. I thought about my last conversation with Chelsea, 3 months ago when I'd asked if she could help me with my car repair. The transmission was slipping, and the mechanic had quoted me $800 for the fix. I'd called her not because I expected her to pay for it, but because I hoped she might know someone, might have a suggestion, might offer to lend me the money until I could pay her back. "Oh Mom," she'd said, her voice full of that particular exhaustion children reserve for their parents' financial problems. "I wish I could help, but things are really tight right now. Jake's been talking about redoing the bathroom, and you know how expensive home renovations are." Things were tight, while they sat on enough money to buy my apartment building, while they spent more on a single vacation than I made in months, while I ate generic cereal and clipped coupons and wore the same 3 dresses to every occasion because I couldn't afford anything else. I opened their refrigerator and stared at the contents: organic everything, imported cheese, wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. The pantry was stocked like they were preparing for a siege, filled with specialty items and gourmet ingredients I'd only seen in cooking magazines. I thought about Chelsea's instruction to make myself at home, to help myself to anything I want. I thought about her casual dismissal of my life, my tiny apartment, my simple Christmas plans. I thought about the way she'd presented this dog-sitting arrangement, as if she were doing me a favor, giving me somewhere nice to spend Christmas instead of alone in my sad little place. and then I thought about what I could do with $4,750. I could pay my rent for 4 months, I could fix my car and have enough left over to take a real vacation, not house-sitting someone else's life, but actually going somewhere I wanted to go. I could buy new clothes, could eat in restaurants, could stop worrying every month about whether I'd have enough money for both groceries and heating. I walked to their home office and turned the computer back on. Their online banking was still open, waiting. One transfer, one click. It would be so easy, but I didn't do it. Not then, not yet. Instead, I sat down at their kitchen table with my phone and started making some calls. The first was to my bank, to check my own balance and confirm what I already knew. I had $347 to my name, and rent was due in 6 days. The second call was to my ex-husband Richard, the man who'd left me for his secretary and was now living in a condo in Scottsdale, posting pictures of his new life on social media like a teenager. "Leona?" His voice was surprised, cautious. We hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true anymore. "I just had a question about Chelsea's college fund, the one we set up when she was little." There was a pause. "What about?" "Well, we put in almost $60,000 over the years, and she never used it for college, because she got that full scholarship." "What happened to that money?" Another pause, longer this time. "We used it for the down payment on their house. Remember, Chelsea asked us to help them get started, and you thought it was a good idea." I did remember vaguely. Chelsea had been so excited about the house, and she'd mentioned needing help with the down payment. I'd been in the middle of the divorce proceedings, overwhelmed and not thinking clearly about financial decisions. I'd signed papers without really reading them, trusting that Richard and Chelsea had my best interests at heart. "How much did we give them?" I asked. "Leona, we've been through this." It was $55,000. It's all documented in the divorce papers. $55,000. Money I'd saved, dollar by dollar, for my daughter's future. Money that had become the foundation of their perfect life, while I struggled to pay for generic groceries. "Did she ever offer to pay any of it back?" I asked. "Why would she? It was a gift, a family investment." His voice was getting impatient. "Look, I don't know why you're bringing this up now, but I have to go. Marcy and I are having people over for Christmas brunch." Marcy, the secretary, who was now living off my ex-husband's pension while I worked part-time at a library, and ate ramen noodles for dinner. I hung up and sat in the silence of my daughter's expensive kitchen, processing the weight of my own naivety. I'd given them $55,000, money that could have secured my future, made my retirement comfortable, given me choices, and in return, I'd gotten the privilege of house-sitting their life while they vacationed in paradise. The third call I made was to Chelsea. It was evening in Cabo, and she answered after several rings, her voice slightly slurred from what I assumed were vacation cocktails. "Mom, is everything okay? Is Max all right?" "Max is fine," I said. "I have a question about something else." "Okay, shoot." "The down payment for your house, the money Dad and I gave you from your college fund." "Oh," her voice changed, became careful. "What about it? I was wondering if you'd ever thought about paying any of it back. I know it's been a few years, but now that you're doing so well, I thought maybe." "Mom," she interrupted me, and I could hear the annoyance in her voice. "That was a gift. You can't just take back a gift." "I'm not trying to take it back," I said carefully. "I'm just saying that my situation has changed since the divorce, and I could really use some help." "Your situation?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Mom, you chose to divorce Dad. You chose to downsize your life. You can't expect us to subsidize your choices." "I chose to divorce your father because he was cheating on me with his secretary." I wanted to say. "I chose to downsize my life because I had no other options. After 30 years of marriage left me with almost nothing." But I didn't say any of that, because I'd spent too many years protecting Chelsea from uncomfortable truths. "I understand," I said instead. "I just thought I'd ask." "Look, Mom, we love you. But we have our own financial goals. We're trying to build something here. And we can't keep bailing out family members who make poor decisions." Bailing out family members. Poor decision. I stared at their mortgage statement. Their bank balance, still displayed on the computer screen, at the evidence of their comfortable life built on the foundation of my sacrifice. Of course, I said. Have a wonderful rest of your vacation. We will. And Mom, thanks again for watching Max. You're really helping us out. After she hung up, I sat in their perfect kitchen and felt something die inside me. Not hope. Exactly, but the last vestige of the woman who'd spent decades making excuses for other people's selfishness. The woman who'd apologized for needing help while her daughter spent more on a single vacation than she made in a year. I looked at Max, who was watching me with those intelligent golden eyes, and made a decision. What do you think, boy? I asked him. Should your mom have to learn what it feels like to worry about money? Max thumped his tail against the floor, which I chose to interpret as agreement. I opened my laptop, my ancient slow laptop that I'd brought with me because I couldn't afford to replace it, and started research. I wanted to understand exactly what I was considering, what the consequences might be, what my options were. What I found was interesting. A mortgage payment missed here and there wouldn't destroy their credit or threaten their home. They had enough money in savings to cover months of payment. It would be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. A small lesson in financial anxiety. Nothing more. But $4,750 could change my entire life. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. All the times I'd smiled and accommodated, and made myself smaller so other people could be more comfortable. All the years I'd spent being grateful for scraps while other people feasted on the meal I'd prepared. I thought about my daughter telling me things were tight while sitting on a fortune. I thought about her dismissing my tiny apartment as sad, my simple Christmas plans as pathetic. I thought about her casual cruelty in reducing my struggles to poor decisions while she benefited from money I'd saved for her future. And I thought about how it would feel to walk into January with enough money to breathe, to pay my rent without panic, to fix my car without going deeper into debt, to buy groceries without calculating every item. I opened their banking website one more time. The transfer screen was simple, straightforward, account to account, the same way they probably moved money around without thinking about it. The mortgage payment was due December 26th, tomorrow. If it didn't go through, they'd have 30 days before any real consequences. Plenty of time to figure it out when they got back from vacation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Max had fallen asleep at my feet, trusting and peaceful, unaware that his temporary caretaker was contemplating a crime that wasn't quite a crime. Because that's what this was. Wasn't it? Not theft. Exactly, since they had plenty of money. Not revenge, because I wasn't trying to hurt them, just a small redistribution of resources from people who had too much to someone who had too little. I thought about my grandmother, who'd raised 5 children during the Depression and never let any of them go hungry. She used to say that family takes care of family, and that sometimes taking care means making hard choices. She'd also said that you can't keep giving from an empty well. My well had been empty for a long time. I typed in the amount, $4,750, the exact amount of their mortgage payment, from their checking account to mine. Then I sat there for another hour, staring at the screen, giving myself time to change my mind, time to be the good mother, the grateful house-sitter, the woman who accepted whatever scraps were offered, and said thank you. But I was tired of being that woman. I was tired of being invisible, convenient, easily dismissed. I was tired of watching other people live while I facilitated their lives from the sidelines. At 11:47 p.m. on Christmas night, I clicked submit. The transfer went through immediately. Confirm. $4,750 moved from their account to mine, with the simple efficiency of modern banking. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Not guilt, though I'd expected that. Not fear, though that might come later. Power. For the first time in decades, I felt powerful. I slept better that night than I had in months. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing with notifications, bank alerts, confirming the deposit. $4,750. Sitting in my account like a small miracle, like the answer to prayers I'd been too proud to voice. I lay in their guest bed, looking at the numbers on my phone screen, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Financial security, even if it was temporary. Max was scratching at the bedroom door, his signal that he needed his morning walk. I got dressed slowly, almost ceremonially, putting on my best jeans, and the sweater Chelsea had bought me last Christmas, the one she'd said brought out my eyes. I wanted to look like a woman who belonged in this neighborhood, who deserved to walk among these perfect houses and manicured lawns. The morning air was crisp and clean, the kind of December day that makes everything look sharper, more vivid. As Max and I walked through the subdivision, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way the winter light caught the frost on the grass, making each blade look like it was dusted with diamonds. The sound of my own footsteps on the pavement, confident and unhurried. I felt different, and I wondered if it showed. We passed a woman about my age walking a small terrier, and instead of looking away the way I usually did, I smiled and said good morning. She smiled back, complimented Max's golden coat, and we chatted for a few minutes about the weather, the holidays, the simple pleasantries that make up the fabric of normal life. It was the kind of interaction I'd been too self-conscious to initiate before, too aware of my own status as an outsider in this world of abundance. When we got back to the house, I made coffee and breakfast, but this time I didn't eat standing up at the counter like I was stealing time. I set a place for myself at their dining room table, used their good china, lit one of their expensive candles. If I was going to be house-sitting, I was going to do it with dignity. While I ate, I thought about what Chelsea and Jake would discover when they returned. The missed mortgage payment would probably trigger an automatic email from their bank, maybe a phone call. They'd log into their account, see the transfer, and try to figure out what had happened. The trail would lead back to their own computer, their own banking login, but it would take them time to piece together the truth. By then, I'd be back in my apartment, the money safely in my account, beyond their immediate reach. They could demand it back, of course, but demands weren't legal obligations. And what were they going to do? Call the police, report that their house sitter had accessed their banking information that they'd given her access to months ago, that she'd transferred money between accounts using passwords they'd never changed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little recourse they actually had. This wasn't theft in any legal sense. This was a family financial dispute, the kind of thing that gets settled in living rooms and lawyers' offices, not courtrooms. My phone rang while I was finishing my second cup of coffee. The caller ID said Chelsea, and my heart rate spiked for a moment, before I remembered that it was barely dawn in Cabo. This was probably about something innocuous. Maybe checking on Max or asking about the weather at home. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice light and cheerful. "You're up early for vacation." "Mom," her voice was sharp, strained. "We need to talk, of course. Is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right." Jake was checking our account this morning to make sure the automatic payments went through, and our mortgage payment didn't transfer. "There's some kind of error." I took a slow sip of coffee, buying myself time. "That's strange. Have you called the bank?" "Not yet. We're trying to figure out what happened first. The money was definitely in the account yesterday, but now—" She paused, and I could hear her talking to Jake in the background, their voices muffled but urgent. "Mom, this is really serious. If our mortgage payment doesn't go through, it could affect our credit. I'm sure it's just a technical glitch," I said, marveling at how calm my voice sounded. "These things happen with automatic payments sometimes, but we can't figure out where the money went. It's like it just disappeared." I made a sympathetic noise, the kind of sound I'd been making for years whenever my daughter encountered problems I couldn't solve. The difference was that this time, I was the problem, and I very much could solve it. I just wasn't going to. "Have you tried calling your bank's customer service line?" I suggested. "They should be able to trace the transaction." "We will, but we're 3 hours behind here, and their offices don't open until 10 our time. This is such a nightmare, Mom. We shouldn't have to deal with this kind of stress on our vacation." Their vacation, their $7,000 vacation to paradise, funded by money they considered too tight to help their struggling mother with an $800 car repair. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, honey," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I didn't want Chelsea to suffer exactly. I just wanted her to understand what financial anxiety felt like, the way it could creep into your thoughts and steal your peace even during what should be happy moments. "We'll probably have to cut our trip short," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Come home and deal with this mess in person." "That seems drastic," I said. "Surely it can wait a few days." "Mom, you don't understand. This is our house we're talking about. Our credit, our financial stability. Our house, our credit, our financial stability. Never mind that their financial stability was built on the foundation of my sacrifice, that their house down payment had come from money I'd saved for their future. Never mind that their credit score was better than mine, because they'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries." "Of course," I said, "I understand completely." After she hung up, I sat in their perfect kitchen and smiled for the first time in months. Not a polite smile, not an accommodating smile, but a real one, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads outward like warmth. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning their house, but not the way I usually cleaned, with nervous efficiency and constant worry about doing something wrong. I cleaned the way you clean your own space, thoroughly but without anxiety. I reorganized their spice cabinet, which was chaos despite their otherwise pristine kitchen. I folded their laundry and put it away, but I also helped myself to one of Chelsea's expensive face masks, the kind that costs more than I usually spend on groceries in a day. In the afternoon, I took Max to the dog park across town, a place I'd never been but had always wanted to visit. It was beautiful, with trails winding through old-growth trees and a fenced area where dogs could run off-leash. Max was ecstatic, racing around with other dogs while I sat on a bench and watched, feeling like I was finally participating in life instead of just observing it from the sideline. A woman with a German Shepherd struck up a conversation with me about dogs, about the neighborhood, about life in general. Her name was Patricia, and she was recently divorced, starting over at 62 with a small apartment and a part-time job at a nonprofit. We talked for an hour, sharing stories about rebuilding after upheaval, about finding joy in small things, about the strange freedom that comes with having nothing left to lose. "It's funny," Patricia said, as we walked back to the parking area. "I spent 30 years worried about what other people thought, trying to keep everyone else happy. Now I just try to keep myself happy, and it turns out that's enough." I thought about her words on the drive back to Chelsea's house. Keep myself happy. What a radical concept for a woman who'd spent decades measuring her worth by how useful she was to other people. That evening I made myself a proper dinner using ingredients from their well-stocked kitchen. Not the simple, economical meals I usually prepared, but something elaborate and indulgent: salmon with herbs, roasted vegetables, a glass of wine from their collection. I ate by candlelight in their dining room, looking out at their perfectly landscaped backyard, and felt like I was finally living instead of just surviving. Chelsea called again around 9, her voice even more strained than it had been that morning. "Mom, we talked to the bank, and they said the money was transferred to another account. An authorized transfer, from our computer." "That's odd," I said, cutting another bite of salmon. "Do you think someone hacked your account?" "That's what we thought at first, but the bank said it was done with our login credentials, from our home IP address. They suggested we check with anyone who had access to our house." The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. I was the only person with access to their house. I was the only person who could have made that transfer. "Well," I said carefully, "I haven't touched your computer. I wouldn't even know how to access your banking information." It wasn't technically a lie. I hadn't known how to access their banking until I'd figured it out yesterday. And I certainly wouldn't have known if Chelsea hadn't given me their login information months ago. "I know, Mom. I told Jake it couldn't be you. You don't even like using technology." Another assumption about who I was, what I was capable of. The helpless older woman who needed instructions to use a smartphone, who couldn't possibly navigate online banking or understand how money transfers worked. "Have you changed your passwords lately?" I asked. "Sometimes these things get compromised without you knowing it." "We'll probably have to do that when we get home. This is just such a mess." "Jake is furious, and were both too stressed to enjoy the rest of our vacation. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while inwardly marveling at the irony. They were stressed about money for the first time in years, while I was sitting in their house eating their expensive food, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "Try not to let it ruin your trip." Easy for you to say. You don't understand what it's like to have this kind of responsibility. This kind of responsibility. The responsibility of owning a house they'd bought with my money, of managing wealth they'd accumulated, while I struggled to pay for basic necessities. After we hung up, I poured myself another glass of their wine, and considered my options. I could confess, transfer the money back, apologize for my moment of madness. I could play the confused older woman, claim I'd somehow made a mistake while trying to help them pay their bill. I could wait until they came home and act surprised by their accusations, let them prove what they couldn't prove. Or I could do something I'd never done in 68 years of life. I could hold my ground. I woke up the next morning to find several missed calls from Chelsea and a series of increasingly frantic text messages. "Mom, call me back. This is urgent. We need to talk now." I made coffee first, fed Max, let him out into the backyard. I took a long shower using their expensive products, dried my hair with their professional-grade hairdryer, put on my best outfit. If I was going to have a confrontation, I was going to look like a woman who deserved respect. When I finally called her back, Chelsea's voice was cold with barely controlled anger. "Mom, we know what happened." "Oh? Did you figure out the banking issue?" "Don't play dumb with me. We know you transferred our mortgage payment to your account." I sat down slowly, surprised by how calm I felt. "That's quite an accusation, Chelsea." "It's not an accusation, it's a fact. The bank traced the transfer. It came from our computer, using our login, and it went directly to your account. The same account we've been sending you money to for years. The same account they'd been sending me money to for years. Birthday checks for $50, Christmas gifts of $100 here and there, the occasional help with a utility bill when I'd swallowed my pride enough to ask. Charity, in other words, crumbs from their table." "I see," I said. "And what exactly do you think happened?" "I think you used our computer to steal our mortgage payment. I think you violated our trust and committed theft." "Theft?" The word hung between us like a sword. "That's a very serious accusation," I said. "Do you have any evidence of this theft?" "Mom, stop it. We know it was you. Just admit it and transfer the money back." "I'm not admitting to anything because I haven't done anything wrong." "You have," she sputtered, apparently unable to complete the sentence. "Mom, you transferred $4,000 from our account to yours without permission. How is that not wrong?" "Well," I said, settling back in their expensive leather chair, "let's think about this logically. You gave me access to your home, your computer, your banking information. You asked me to take care of your responsibilities while you were gone. I took care of a responsibility. Taking care of responsibilities doesn't mean stealing our mortgage payment. I prefer to think of it as redistributing resources within the family." "Redistributing resources?" Her voice pitched higher. "Are you out of your mind?" "Actually, I think I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time in years." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Chelsea spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Mom, if you don't transfer that money back immediately, we're going to have to take legal action." "Legal action?" I almost laughed. "I think you should do whatever you feel is necessary, sweetheart." "Mom, please, just tell me why. Why would you do this to us?" The question I'd been waiting for, the question that opened the door to everything I'd been carrying silently for years. "Do you remember your college fund?" I asked. "What does that have to do with anything?" $55,000. Your father and I saved that money for your education, $1 at a time, over 18 years. We went without vacations, without new cars, without a lot of things so that you could have opportunities we never had. I got a scholarship. I didn't need the money for college." "No. You needed it for a house down payment instead. My money became the foundation of your adult life while I was left with nothing, after the divorce. That was a gift. You can't take back a gift." "You're right. I can't take back a gift, but I can take back what I give going forward." "This isn't about gifts, Mom. This is theft. Is it? Let me tell you what theft looks like, Chelsea. Theft is watching your daughter spend more on a vacation than you make in a year, while telling you that money is too tight to help with an $800 car repair. Theft is being treated like a burden when you ask for help, like your financial struggles are somehow your own moral failing. Theft is being invited to house sit so you won't be alone in your sad little apartment on Christmas, while your family lives it up in paradise. Mom, I'm not finished. Theft is spending 30 years sacrificing your own dreams and ambitions to raise a daughter who grows up to see you as an inconvenience. Theft is giving everything you have to your family and getting invited to watch their dog in return. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken resentment and disappointed expectations. "We love you, Mom," Chelsea said finally, her voice smaller now. "I'm sure you do. The way people love their reliable old furniture. Comfortable, familiar, useful when needed, easily ignored when not. That's not fair." "Fair?" I stood up, pacing around their perfect living room with their perfect furniture and their perfect life built on my sacrifice. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about fair. I gave you $55,000 for your future, and you've never offered to pay back a penny. You live in a house I helped buy while I worry about making rent. You spend more on a single vacation than I have in my entire savings account. You have enough money to live comfortably for years without working, while I stock library shelves at minimum wage just to survive. And you want to talk about fair? Mom, you're scaring me." "Good. It's about time someone in this family was scared about money. It's about time someone worried about how they're going to pay their bills. We'll lose our house if we can't make the mortgage payment." "No, you won't. You have plenty of money in savings to cover the payment. You'll just have to dip into your reserves instead of using the money to redecorate your bathroom or plan your next exotic vacation." "How do you know about our savings?" "The same way I knew about your mortgage payment. You gave me access. Remember, you trusted me to take care of things while you were gone. This isn't taking care of things. This is revenge." "This isn't revenge, Chelsea. This is education. This is what it feels like to have your financial security threatened by someone you trust. This is what it feels like to discover that your safety net has holes in it. Mom, please, just transfer the money back, and we can talk about this when we get home. We are talking about this right now. And here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm keeping the money." "You can't do that. Watch me." I hung up the phone and turned it off. Outside, Max was barking at a squirrel in the backyard, completely oblivious to the family drama unfolding inside. I envied him his simple concerns, his uncomplicated loyalty, his ability to live entirely in the present moment. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity of finally spoken truths. I'd crossed a line, burned a bridge, violated the unspoken contract that had governed my relationship with my daughter for decades. I was no longer the accommodating mother, the grateful grandmother, the convenient house-sitter who could be counted on to smile and say yes, and ask for nothing in return. I was something else now. Something I'd never been before. I was dangerous. The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. I went through the motions of caring for Max, of maintaining the house, of playing the role of the responsible caretaker, but underneath it all, I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the consequences of my actions to come crashing down around me. But nothing happened. No police showed up at the door, no lawyers called, no dramatic confrontations materialized. The world continued to turn, the sun continued to shine, and I continued to exist in their perfect house with their perfect life, now funded by money I'd taken from them. That evening, I cooked myself another elaborate dinner and opened another bottle of their expensive wine. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, each sip, each moment of luxury that I'd paid for with decades of sacrifice. Tomorrow, Chelsea and Jake would probably cut their vacation short and come home to deal with the crisis I'd created. They'd demand explanations, threaten consequences, try to guilt me into compliance. But tonight, I was just a woman sitting in a beautiful house, eating good food, drinking excellent wine, with $4,750 in her bank account, and absolutely nothing to apologize for. For the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen myself over everyone else's comfort, and it felt magnificent. I awoke to the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the guest bedroom window, I could see a black sedan idling at the curb, its engine running in the cold morning air. My watch read 6:23 a.m. Chelsea and Jake had indeed cut their vacation short, arriving 3 days early with the kind of urgency reserved for genuine emergencies. I took my time getting dressed, choosing my clothes carefully. The navy blue dress Chelsea had always complimented me on, the pearl earrings that had been my mother's, the low heels that made me feel taller and more substantial. If I was going to face an inquisition, I would face it looking like a woman who commanded respect. Max was already at the front door, tail wagging with the uncomplicated joy of seeing his owner's return. I let him out into the backyard before they could reach the door, giving myself a few more moments to prepare for what was coming. The key turned in the lock, and I heard Chelsea's voice, tight with exhaustion and barely controlled anger. "Mom, we're home." I walked into the foyer at my own pace, unhurried, carrying a cup of coffee in my hands like a shield. Chelsea looked terrible. Her vacation tan couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, and her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Jake stood behind her, his face grim, still wearing the wrinkled clothes he'd traveled in. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "You're back early. How was the flight?" Chelsea stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "How was the flight, Mom? Are you serious right now?" "I'm always serious about politeness, dear. It's how civilized people begin conversation." Jake stepped forward, his accountant's mind clearly working through the implications of my calm demeanor. "Leona, we need to discuss what happened while we were gone." "Of course, but perhaps you'd like to freshen up first. You both look exhausted." "We look exhausted because we've been traveling for 18 hours trying to get home to deal with the crisis you created," Chelsea snapped. "I created." I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I understand." "Mom, stop playing games. You know exactly what you did." I walked into the living room and settled into their most comfortable armchair, the one Jake usually claimed as his own. "Why don't you tell me what you think I did? I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings." Chelsea followed me, her hands clenched into fists at her side. "You stole our mortgage payment. You used our computer, our banking information, our trust, to steal from us." "Such strong language," I mused. "Steal, that implies taking something that doesn't belong to me. The money doesn't belong to you, doesn't?" I set down my coffee cup and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. "Let me ask you something, Chelsea. Do you remember when you were 7 years old and you wanted that expensive American Girl doll for Christmas? What does that have to do with anything?" "I worked 3 part-time jobs that fall to afford it, cleaned offices at night, worked retail on weekends, babysat other people's children while you were at school. Do you remember what I told you when you asked why I was always so tired?" Chelsea's face flushed. "Mom, this isn't the time for—" "I told you that sometimes mommies work extra hard to make sure their little girls have nice things. I told you that family takes care of family, and that love means sacrifice." I was 7 years old. Yes. And I was 26. Working myself to exhaustion so you could have everything your heart desired. "Do you remember when you wanted to take dance lessons?" "Mom, I sold my wedding ring to pay for them. Your father never knew." I told him I'd lost it. Gardening, bought a cheap replacement from a pawn shop. "Do you remember when you wanted to go on that school trip to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade? Stop it. I took out a loan I couldn't afford, ate rice and beans for 3 months to make the payment. But you gotta go, didn't you? You gotta see the Lincoln Memorial and the Smithsonian and pose for pictures with your friends." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Leona, we understand that you made sacrifices. I turned to him, this man who'd benefited from my daughter's education, her confidence, her opportunities. "Do you really understand? Because if you understood, you might wonder why a woman who spent 30 years giving everything she had to her child is now living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage, and worrying about how to pay for her car repair." "That's because of the divorce," Chelsea said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The divorce that left me with nothing because I'd spent my entire adult life investing in other people's futures instead of my own. The divorce that happened because your father decided he wanted a younger woman after I'd given him the best years of my life." "Mom, I'm sorry about the divorce, But are you really sorry? Because when I asked for help with my car, you told me money was tight. When I mentioned that I was struggling to pay rent, you suggested I look into senior housing. When I called to tell you I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries, you gave me a lecture about budget. The room fell silent except for the sound of Max scratching at the back door, wanting to come inside. Meanwhile, I continued, you were planning $7,000 vacations and talking about bathroom renovation. You were living in a house that my money helped buy, building wealth on the foundation of my sacrifice, and treating me like a charity case when I asked for basic assistance. We offered to help with your rent, Jake said weakly. You offered to help me find a cheaper apartment. You offered to look into government assistance programs. You offered everything except actual financial help, despite having more money than you could spend in a lifetime. Chelsea sank onto the couch, her anger giving way to something that looked like understanding. Mom, we never meant to make you feel invisible, worthless, like a burden. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Whether you meant to or not, that's exactly how you made me feel. And when I finally decided I'd had enough, when I finally took something back after years of giving everything away, you called it theft, because that's what it is, Chelsea said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. Is it the first payment on a debt that can never be fully repaid? I walked to their home office and returned with a folder I'd prepared during my sleepless night. Inside were calculations I'd done, numbers I'd researched, documentation of a lifetime of financial sacrifice. Shall we talk about theft? I opened the folder and spread the papers on their coffee table. Here's what I spent on your education, from preschool through high school, not including the college fund, which we've already discussed. Their eyes widened as they saw the total. $63,000. Here's what I spent on your extracurricular activities: dance, music lessons, sports equipment, summer camps, school trips. Another page, $41,000. Here's what I spent on your medical and dental care not covered by insurance: braces, contacts, therapy after your father and I divorced. $28,000. Here's what I spent on your car insurance, your gas and maintenance, until you graduated college. $35,000. Clothes, birthday parties, Christmas presents, graduation gifts, wedding expenses. $57,000. The total comes to just over $274,000. That's what I invested in you over the course of your childhood and young adulthood. That's what I gave you freely and without expectation of repayment, because I loved you and wanted you to have the best possible start in life. Chelsea stared at the papers, her face pale. Mom, I never asked you to. No, you didn't. You didn't need to ask, because good mothers give their children what they need without being asked. But here's the thing about investments, sweetheart. Sometimes they pay dividends. I pulled out another paper, this one showing current interest rates and return calculation. If I had invested that money in a conservative portfolio instead of in you, it would be worth approximately $460,000 today. Enough to buy a house, to secure my retirement, to live with dignity instead of scraping by on Social Security and part-time wages. But you can't put a price on, Jake started. On what? On love? On family? You're absolutely right. You can't put a price on those things, but you can put a price on security, on respect, on being treated like your sacrifices matter. I gathered the papers back into the folder. $4,750 represents less than 2% of what I invested in Chelsea's future. If you want to call that theft, then I'd like to report a theft of my own. I'd like to report the theft of my financial security, my retirement savings, my peace of mind. I'd like to report the theft of my dignity by people who benefited from my sacrifice, and then treated me like a burden when I needed help in return. The silence that followed was deafening. Chelsea was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. Jake was studying the calculations, his accountant's mind probably verifying my math and finding it sound. Mom, Chelsea whispered, I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't, and that's the problem. You never had to think about money, because I made sure you never wanted for anything. You never had to worry about sacrifice, because I did all the sacrificing for you. You never had to consider the cost of your security because someone else was paying the price. So what happens next? Jake asked. Do you want us to reimburse you for everything? Because even with our savings we couldn't. I don't want your money, Jake. I never wanted your money. I wanted your respect. I wanted to be treated like family instead of charity. I wanted my daughter to see me as more than just the help. I walked to the window and looked out at their perfect yard, their perfect neighborhood, their perfect life that I had helped make possible. What I want is very simple. I want to be included, not accommodated. I want to be consulted, not managed. I want to be seen as a person with thoughts and feelings and needs, not just as the woman who's always available to babysit your dog or house sit your life while you live it up in paradise. We can do that, Chelsea said quickly. We can be better. Can you? Because change isn't just saying different words, Chelsea. Change is making different choices. Change is looking at your mother struggling to pay rent and offering real help instead of budget advice. Change is including her in your plans, instead of offering her the leftovers of your attention. I turned back to face them, these two people who had been the center of my world for so long that I'd forgotten I was supposed to be the center of my own. I'm keeping the money, I said simply. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but as a reminder that I matter, that my needs are valid, that my sacrifices meant something. Mom, we can't just let you, Chelsea started. You can't let me what? Take care of myself for once, put my own needs first, use my own judgment about what I deserve? It's stealing, Jake said, but he sounded less certain than before. Then call the police, press charges, explain to them how your house sitter accessed the banking information you gave her and transferred money to pay a debt you'd never acknowledged. Explain how a woman who gave you everything has committed theft by taking back less than 2% of her investment. We stared at each other across the chasm that had opened between us, years of unspoken resentment and unexamined assumptions, laid bare in the harsh light of truth. I don't want to lose you, Mom, Chelsea said finally. Then don't lose me. But understand that the woman you thought you knew, the one who said yes to everything and asked for nothing in return, she's gone. I'm still your mother, but I'm also Leona Bailey, a woman with her own wants and needs and boundaries. If you can love that person, if you can respect that person, then we'll be fine. And if we can't, I picked up my purse and my coat, preparing to leave their house and return to my own life, my own space, my own choices. Then you'll have learned a very expensive lesson about taking people for granted. Max had been let in through the back door, and was now sitting in the hallway, looking confused by the tension in the room. I knelt down and scratched his ears. This sweet, uncomplicated creature who had been my only source of unconditional affection over the past week. Take care of yourself, Max, I whispered. Don't let anyone take advantage of your good nature. I walked to the guest room and packed my things quickly, efficiently, the way I'd learned to move through life without taking up too much space or causing too much trouble. But this time felt different. This time I was leaving by choice, with my head high, and my bank account full enough to give me options I hadn't had in years. Chelsea followed me to the front door, her face streaked with tears. Mom, please don't go like this. Can't we talk about this more? We've talked enough for today. But Chelsea, I turned to face her one last time, if you want to have a relationship with me going forward, it needs to be between equals. I'm done being the grateful mother who's lucky to get scraps of your attention. I'm done being the convenient solution to your problems. I'm done being invisible in my own family. I never meant to make you feel invisible. I know you didn't. But intent doesn't erase and the impact of 30 years of being taken for granted is that I finally learned to take something for myself. I called a taxi from my phone, pleased that I could afford the luxury without calculating the cost against my grocery budget. While we waited, Chelsea and Jake stood in their doorway looking shell-shocked, like survivors of a natural disaster they hadn't seen coming. Mom, Chelsea called as the taxi pulled up. I love you too, sweetheart. But love isn't enough anymore. I need respect. I need consideration. I need to matter in my own life. The taxi driver helped me with my suitcase, and I settled into the back seat with the satisfaction of a woman who had finally spoken her truth. As we drove away from their perfect house in their perfect neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, Pride in myself, not pride in what I'd done for others, not pride in how useful I'd been, not pride in how well I'd hidden my own needs, pride in standing up for myself, pride in demanding better, pride in finally choosing my own welfare over everyone else's comfort. My phone buzzed with text messages from Chelsea, but I didn't read them, not yet. I needed time to process what had just happened, to understand the magnitude of the change I'd initiated in my own life. I'd spent 68 years learning to be small, accommodating, grateful for whatever crumbs were offered. In 1 week I'd unlearned all of it. The taxi dropped me at my apartment building, and I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my small studio with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. This tiny space that Chelsea had called sad and pathetic suddenly looked like freedom to me. Every item in it had been chosen by me, arranged by me, paid for by me. No one could take it away, rearrange it, or make me feel grateful for being allowed to exist in it. I made a cup of tea, and sat by my single window, looking out at the parking lot and the busy street beyond. It wasn't a view of manicured lawns and expensive cars, but it was mine, and for the first time in my adult life, mine was enough. My phone continued to buzz with messages, but I turned it off and placed it in a drawer. Tomorrow I would deal with the consequences of my choice. Tomorrow I would face whatever threats, or pleas or guilt trips they sent my way. Tomorrow I would begin the process of building a new relationship with my daughter, one based on mutual respect, rather than unequal sacrifice. But today, I was just a woman sitting in her own space, with enough money in her account to pay her bills without anxiety, watching the world go by outside her window. I had $4,750, a clear conscience, and the novel sensation of having put my own needs first. I opened my laptop and began to research something I'd been thinking about for years, but never had the courage or resources to pursue. Community college courses, not to improve my job prospects or make myself more useful to others, but simply because I'd always wanted to learn more about art history, literature, maybe even accounting so I could understand money, the way Jake did. For the first time in my adult life, I had options, not because someone else had given them to me, but because I had claimed them for myself. The woman who had raised Chelsea, who had sacrificed everything for her family, who had disappeared into the background of her own life, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone I was just beginning to know. Someone who mattered. Someone who took up space. Someone who refused to be invisible. Someone worth investing in. And as I researched class schedules and admission requirements, planning a future that belonged entirely to me, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. It had taken learning to be selfish to finally understand my own worth. My phone, despite being turned off, seemed to pulse with the weight of unread messages. But they could wait, everything could wait, while I figured out who I was going to be now that I'd stopped being everyone else's solution to their problems. Outside my window, snow began to fall, dusting the ugly parking lot with something clean and new. I watched it accumulate on the windshields of tired cars and thought about fresh starts, about second chances, about the beautiful possibility of a life lived on your own terms. At 68 years old, I was finally ready to begin. 3 days passed in blissful silence. I'd turned off my phone after the confrontation, needing time to process the seismic shift I'd created in my own life, without the constant buzzing of other people's reactions. During those 3 days, I did things I hadn't done in years. I slept until my body naturally woke up, not because an alarm demanded it. I read an entire novel in one sitting, curled up in my reading chair with a cup of good coffee I'd splurged on with my newfound financial freedom. I walked through the city center, window shopping not because I planned to buy anything, but because I could afford to consider purchases that weren't strictly necessary. On the 4th morning, I turned my phone back on and watched as dozens of messages flooded in. Texts from Chelsea, ranging from angry to pleading to confused. Voicemails from Jake, his accountant's voice trying to reason through the situation like a mathematical equation. A few messages from numbers I didn't recognize, probably family members who'd been recruited to the cause of getting me to return the money. I deleted them all without reading or listening to them completely. Not out of spite, but because I needed to establish a new path. For 68 years, I'd been available to everyone else's emotional needs, instantly, dropping everything to soothe their problems and comfort their anxieties. That version of myself was retire. Instead, I made breakfast and sat down to read the newspaper I'd bought the day before, a small luxury I'd given up years ago when every dollar mattered. There was something deeply satisfying about the rustle of real paper, the smell of newsprint, the ritual of folding each section neatly when I finished reading it. Around 10 o'clock there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged with graying hair and a kind face, holding a small potted plant. "Misa Bailey?" she said when I opened the door. "I'm Patricia Morrison. We met at the dog park a few days ago." I remembered her, the divorced woman with the German Shepherd, the one who'd talked about learning to keep herself happy. Patricia, of course. "Please, come in." She stepped into my small apartment, her eyes taking in the space without judgment. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. You mentioned you lived in this building, and I was in the neighborhood. I brought you a little housewarming gift." She handed me the plant, a small succulent in a cheerful yellow pot. "That's very thoughtful, but I've been living here for 5 years." "I know," she said with a smile, "but you seemed like someone who was starting over, and starting over deserves recognition no matter when it happens." I invited her to sit, made us both tea, and found myself telling her about the past week. Not everything, but enough. How I'd finally stood up to my daughter's financial carelessness, how I'd taken back some of what I'd given over the years, how I'd discovered the power of putting my own needs first. Patricia listened without judgment, nodding at appropriate moments, asking thoughtful questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, turning her teacup in her hands. "My ex-husband used to say I was selfish," she said finally. "Every time I wanted something for myself, something that didn't directly benefit him or our children, he'd call it selfish. For years I believed him. I thought being a good wife and mother meant never wanting anything for myself." "What changed your mind?" "My daughter started dating a man who treated her the way my husband treated me, taking her for granted, dismissing her needs, making her feel guilty for having wants and desires. When I saw her shrinking herself to accommodate his ego, I realized I'd taught her that by example." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "That's when I understood that teaching our children to sacrifice themselves isn't love. It's preparing them to be victims." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Had I taught Chelsea that love meant taking without giving? Had my years of selfless sacrifice actually created a selfish daughter? "I left my husband 6 months later," Patricia continued. "Best decision I ever made. My daughter left her boyfriend shortly after, once she saw what it looked like for a woman to choose herself." We talked for another hour about the strange courage it takes to disappoint people you love, about the difference between being generous and being used, about the radical act of treating yourself as well as you treat others. When she left, I felt less alone than I had in years. That afternoon, I did something I'd been considering since I'd gotten home. I called the community college and spoke to an admissions counselor about their continuing education program. The woman on the phone was enthusiastic and helpful, explaining that many of their students were older adults returning to education for personal enrichment rather than career advancement. "We have an excellent art history program," she said, "and our literature courses are very popular with students your age. Would you like to schedule a campus visit?" I would. For the first time in decades, I had something to look forward to that was entirely my own. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Chelsea's number, and after 4 days of silence, I decided it was time to hear what she had to say. "Mom," her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, uncertain in a way that reminded me of the little girl she'd once been. "Hello, Chelsea. I've been trying to reach you for days." I know. I needed some time to think. About what? About what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. There was a long pause. "Mom, I've been thinking too. About what you said. About the calculations you showed up. I never realized." "What didn't you realize?" "How much you gave up for me. How much you invested in my life while neglecting your own. I sat down in my reading chair, the one Chelsea had never seen because she'd never visited my apartment. It wasn't neglect. Exactly. I thought that's what good mothers did. I thought love meant sacrifice. But you were wrong. Not entirely. Parents should sacrifice for their children when necessary. But they shouldn't sacrifice themselves completely. They shouldn't disappear into the role so completely that they forget their people too. I made you disappear. No, sweetheart. I made myself disappear. I chose to be invisible because I thought that's what you needed from me. But children don't need invisible mothers. They need whole people who can model what it looks like to have a life worth living. Chelsea was crying. I could hear it in her breathing, in the small sounds she made between words. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. You don't fix it. You learn from it. You do better going forward. But the money isn't the point, Chelsea. The money was never the point. Then what is the point? I looked around my small apartment, at the succulent Patricia had brought me, at the college brochures I'd spread across my kitchen table, at the evidence of a life I was finally beginning to live on my own terms. The point is that I matter, that my needs and wants and dreams are as valid as anyone else's. That being a good mother doesn't mean being a non-person. You were never a non-person to me. Wasn't I? When's the last time you asked me about my hopes and dreams? When's the last time you were curious about my thoughts on something that had nothing to do with you? When's the last time you saw me as Leona Bailey instead of just Mom? The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unexamined assumptions. I don't know, she whispered finally. That's okay. Most children don't see their parents as full human beings until they're adults themselves. But you're 32 now, Chelsea. You're old enough to see me clearly. I want to try. I want to see you clearly. Then start by telling me something about yourself that has nothing to do with me, or Jake, or your house, or your job. Tell me something you want, something you dream about, something that's entirely yours. Another long pause. I've always wanted to learn to paint. Not for any reason. Not to decorate the house or make gifts for people, just because I think it would be beautiful to create something with my hands. Why haven't you? I don't know. It seemed frivolous, like something only people with too much time and money do. You have too much time and money. She laughed, a sound somewhere between humor and tears. I guess I do. So learn to paint, take classes, buy supplies, make terrible art until you learn to make better art. Do something just because you want to, not because it serves any purpose beyond your own joy. Is that what you're doing? Learning to want things just for yourself? I'm learning to remember that I'm allowed to want things for myself. It's harder than you might think after decades of practice at the opposite. Mom, about the money. What about it? Jake thinks we should press charges. He says it's stealing regardless of the circumstances. I wasn't surprised. Jake approached life like a balance sheet, where every transaction had clear moral implications based on legal definitions. And what do you think? I think you spent 30 years giving me everything I needed to become the person I am today. I think $4,000 is a very small down payment on a debt I can never fully repay. Something loosened in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying for days without realizing it. I think you're starting to see clearly, I said. But Jake is your husband, not your conscience. You get to decide what's right based on your own values, not his accounting principles. He's threatening to go to the police himself. Let him. I'd be interested to hear him explain to officers how his mother-in-law committed theft by using the banking information they gave her to transfer money to pay a family debt they'd never acknowledged. You're not scared? Of the police? No. Of losing my relationship with you? That would be devastating, but I won't be threatened into returning to a dynamic that was killing me slowly. We talked for another 30 minutes, carefully, tentatively, like strangers learning each other's language. She told me about her work, really told me not just the surface details but her frustrations and ambitions. I told her about my plan to take college courses, about my growing friendship with Patricia, about the small pleasures I was discovering in my solitary life. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected, hope. Not that things would return to the way they were, but that they might become something better. The next morning brought another knock at my door. This time it was Jake, standing in my hallway with his shoulders squared and his jaw set like a man preparing for battle. "Hello, Jake." "Leona. We need to talk." "Do we? Come in." He followed me into my apartment, his eyes scanning the space with what looked like surprise. I realized he'd never been here before. In 5 years of living in this building, my daughter and son-in-law had never once visited me. "It's smaller than I expected," he said. "Most people's realities are smaller than you expect when you've never bothered to see them." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "That's not what I meant, isn't it? Sit down, Jake. Tell me what's on your mind." He perched on the edge of my couch, uncomfortable in the space, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "The money, Leona. We need to resolve this situation." "What situation is that?" "You know what situation. You took $4,000 from our account without permission." "I had permission. You gave me access to your home, your computer, your banking information. You told me to take care of things while you were gone." "Taking care of things doesn't include stealing our mortgage payment." "There's that word again. Stealing." "Let me ask you something, Jake. How much money did you and Chelsea spend on your vacation?" "That's not relevant. Humor me." He shifted uncomfortably. "About $7,000 on a single week of pleasure while your mother-in-law worries about how to pay for car repairs. $7,000 thrown away on temporary luxury, while the woman who helped buy your house eats peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. Your financial situation isn't our responsibility, isn't it? When your financial stability was built on my investment, that was a gift. Was it? Because I don't remember any gift-giving ceremony. I remember my daughter asking for help with a down payment, and her parents providing it, because that's what parents do." Jake pulled out his phone and showed me something on the screen. "I've been researching this, Leona. What you did is called elder financial abuse when it's done to you. When you do it to someone else, it's just theft." I looked at the screen, at the legal definitions he'd found, at his attempt to use law and logic to navigate what was fundamentally an emotional situation. "You know what else I've been researching, Jay? The average cost of raising a child to adulthood. The current estimate is about $230,000. That's just the basics. Food, clothing, housing, education, healthcare. It doesn't include extras like dance lessons or summer camps or family vacations. So I spent more than that on Chelsea, significantly more. I have the receipts, Jake. I kept track of every penny, because I wanted to make sure she had everything she needed. That was your choice as a parent. You're absolutely right. It was my choice. Just like this is my choice. Just like keeping this money is my choice. It's illegal." "Prove it. Explain to a judge that your house-sitter committed theft by accessing the banking information you gave her and transferring money to pay a debt you'd never acknowledge. Explain that the woman who invested nearly $300,000 in your wife's upbringing is a criminal for taking back less than 2% of that investment." Jake stared at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're not the woman I thought you were." "No, I'm not. The woman you thought I was didn't exist. She was a performance I gave for so long that I forgot it wasn't real." Chelsea is devastated. Chelsea is learning that actions have consequences, that taking people for granted eventually costs you their goodwill. That love without respect isn't sustainable. She loves you. I know she does, but love isn't enough anymore, Jake. I need respect. I need consideration. I need to be seen as a person with valid needs and feelings. And if we can't give you that, then you'll have learned a very expensive lesson about how to treat family." He left without another word, but I could see the wheels turning in his accountant's mind. He was calculating the costs and benefits of various approaches, weighing the expense of legal action against the damage to his relationship with Chelsea, considering the optics of a wealthy couple prosecuting an elderly mother over a family financial dispute. By the time he reached his car, I was confident I'd seen the last of his threats. That afternoon, I enrolled in 3 classes at the community college: Introduction to Art History, Contemporary American Literature, and Personal Financial Management. The total cost was less than what Chelsea and Jake had spent on a single dinner during their vacation. That evening, Patricia called to invite me to join her book club. "We're reading Toni Morrison this month," she said, "and we always need new perspective." I said yes immediately, surprising myself with my eagerness to join something, to be part of a group, to have social obligations that had nothing to do with being useful to my family. For the first time in my adult life, I was building a life that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Chelsea. "Mom, I talked to Jake. We're not going to pursue this legally, but we need to find a new way to move forward." I typed back, "I agree, but it has to be a relationship between equals, not between a giver and a taker. I understand. Can we have dinner next week? Somewhere neutral, just you and me." "I'd like that." As I set down my phone, I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back at me was someone I was still getting to know. She had the same face, the same gray hair, the same lines around her eyes, but there was something different in her posture, something new in her expression. She looked like someone who mattered to herself. The next week brought my first day of class. I arrived early, nervous in a way I hadn't been since childhood, carrying a new notebook and wearing an outfit I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The other students were a mix of ages, but many were older adults like myself, pursuing education for the joy of learning rather than career advancement. In art history, we studied the Impressionists, and I found myself moved to tears by Monet's water lilies, by the way he'd captured light and shadow, by the pure beauty of creation for its own sake. In literature, we discussed the concept of the unreliable narrator, and I thought about how I'd been an unreliable narrator of my own life for decades, telling myself stories about love and sacrifice that weren't entirely true. But it was the personal financial management class that proved most revelatory. As I learned about investment strategies, retirement planning, and wealth building, I realized how much of my financial insecurity had come from ignorance. I'd spent my entire adult life letting other people make financial decisions for me, first my husband, then my daughter and son-in-law, never learning to manage money for myself. "The most important thing to understand," the instructor said during our first class, "is that financial security isn't about how much you earn, it's about how much you keep and how wisely you manage what you have." I thought about the $4,750 sitting in my account, and for the first time I began to see it not as stolen money, or even as rightful compensation, but as seed money for a future I was only beginning to imagine. After class, I stopped at the campus bookstore and bought textbooks, supplies, a coffee mug with the college logo, small purchases that marked my membership in this community of learners, this group of people who believed they deserved to grow and change regardless of their age. That evening, Chelsea called to confirm our dinner plans. We'd agreed to meet at a restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral territory where we could attempt to build something new. "Mom," she said before we hung up, "I've been thinking about what you said, about seeing you as Leona Bailey instead of just Mom, and I realized I don't know very much about Leona Bailey. I know about Mom, the woman who took care of everyone else. But I don't know about your dreams, your interests, what makes you happy when no one else is around. Would you like to learn?" Yes, I really would. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my new textbooks spread around me, working through financial planning exercises that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. But nothing seemed impossible anymore. I was a woman who'd stood up to her own family, who'd claimed her worth in concrete terms, who'd chosen her own welfare over everyone else's comfort. I was a woman who was finally learning to invest in herself. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and I thought about all the lives being lived behind those lights, all the dreams being pursued, all the courage being summoned by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Tomorrow I would have dinner with my daughter, and begin the slow work of building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than unequal sacrifice. Tomorrow I would continue learning about art and literature and money, feeding a mind that had been starved for stimulation for too long. But tonight, I was just a woman sitting in her own space, surrounded by evidence of a life she was finally living on her own terms, feeling grateful not for what others had given her, but for what she had finally given herself. The courage to matter in her own life, the wisdom to know she deserved better, the strength to demand it. and the money to make it possible. The restaurant Chelsea had chosen was called Seasons, a quiet place with exposed brick walls and soft lighting that made everyone look younger and more hopeful. I arrived 10 minutes early, a habit I'd developed over the years, and asked for a table by the window where I could watch people walking by on the street. There was something comforting about observing life in motion, about being part of the world while maintaining a safe distance from its complications. When Chelsea walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older somehow, more thoughtful, as if the events of the past 2 weeks had added weight to her features. She was carrying a small wrapped package, and her smile was uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. "Mom," she said, leaning down to hug me before taking her seat. "You look different." "Different how?" "Stronger, maybe. More present." She studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize features they'd never noticed before. "Are you wearing makeup?" I touched my cheek self-consciously. I had applied a light foundation and lipstick, something I rarely bothered with anymore. "A little. I've been making more of an effort lately." "An effort for what?" "For myself, for the simple pleasure of feeling put together when I leave the house." Chelsea nodded, filing this information away like she was learning a new language. We ordered wine, something I also rarely did when dining out because of the expense, but tonight felt like an occasion worth marking. "I brought you something," she said, sliding the wrapped package across the table. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside the box was a small leather journal, the kind with unlined pages that invited creativity rather than mere note-taking. The cover was soft brown leather, worn-looking in a way that suggested quality rather than age. "I thought maybe you could use it for your college classes," she said. "Or for anything, really. Whatever you want to write down." "Thank you. It's beautiful. There's something else." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I've been thinking about what you said about the money you invested in me over the years. This doesn't come close to covering it, but it's a start." I opened the envelope and found a check for $15,000. "Chelsea, I can't." "Yes, you can. It's from my personal savings, not our joint account. Jake doesn't even know about it." She paused, her fingers worrying the edge of her napkin. "I've been saving this money for years, just in case. In case something happened to our marriage, in case I needed to leave, in case I needed to be independent. But I realized that my independence was built on your dependence, and that's not right." I stared at the check, at the amount that represented more money than I'd had in my personal account since the divorce. "What changed your mind?" "I've been seeing someone, a therapist." She looked embarrassed, as if admitting to needing help was somehow shameful. "I started going after you left our house that day. I couldn't stop thinking about what you'd said, about how I'd made you feel invisible. Therapy is good. It takes courage to look at yourself honestly." She helped me understand something I'd never realized before, that I learned how to be in relationships by watching you and Dad, and what I learned was that love means one person gives everything, while the other person takes it for granted. The waiter brought our wine, and we both took grateful sips before continuing. "I modeled my marriage after your marriage," Chelsea continued. "Jake provides. I manage the home and handle the emotional labor, and neither of us questions whether it's fair or sustainable. But after watching what happened to you, I realized I was setting myself up for the same kind of invisibility." "What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to have conversations with Jake about sharing responsibilities more equally, about me having interests and goals that don't revolve around our household, about him seeing me as a full person instead of just a wife." I thought about the young woman Chelsea had been when she married Jake, how eager she'd been to please, how quickly she'd adapted herself to his preferences and routines. How is he handling these conversations? "Not well." He kept saying he didn't understand what had changed, why I was suddenly dissatisfied with our life, but I told him about you. About how you'd spent 30 years sacrificing yourself for your family and ended up alone and struggling. I told him I didn't want to end up like that, and he's starting to listen, slowly. His mother was a lot like you, actually. Very giving. Very accommodating. She died when Jake was in college, and I think he never really processed what her sacrifices cost her. We ordered dinner, and as we waited for our food, Chelsea asked me about my classes, about my new friend Patricia, about the life I was building for myself. She listened with genuine curiosity, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from previous conversations. It was the first time in years that I felt seen by my daughter as a complete person, rather than just a supporting character in her story. "Tell me about your art history class," she said. "What are you studying?" I described the unit on Impressionism, the way Monet had captured light on water, how the paintings had moved me to tears in a way I couldn't fully explain. "I'd like to see some of his work," Chelsea said. "Maybe we could go to a museum together sometime." "You'd want to do that." "I'd love to do that. I realize I don't know what kind of art you like, what music you listen to, what books you read for pleasure. I know you as mom, but I don't know you as a person with taste and preferences. Most children don't think about their parents as having inner lives. But I'm not a child anymore. I'm 32 years old, and I should know my mother better than I do." Our food arrived and we ate slowly, savoring both the meal and the unfamiliar pleasure of conversation that wasn't about logistics or obligation. Chelsea told me about her secret dream of learning to paint, about the art supplies she'd bought, but hidden in a closet, because Jake had made comments about the expense. "Why hide them?" I asked. "Because he makes me feel guilty about spending money on things that aren't practical. Even though it's my money too, even though we can afford it." That sounds familiar. It does, doesn't it? I wonder if that's how Dad made you feel about your interest. I thought about the poetry I'd stopped writing, the books I'd stopped buying, the small pleasures I'd gradually eliminated from my life, because they seemed frivolous in the face of more pressing family needs. "Your father wasn't cruel about it," I said. "He just didn't see the value in things that didn't serve a practical purpose, and I learned to see myself through his eyes." "Is that why you stopped writing poetry?" I looked up, surprised. "How did you know I used to write poetry?" "I found some of your poems when I was cleaning out the attic before we moved. They were beautiful, Mom." "Why did you stop?" "I don't know exactly. Life got busy, priorities shifted. Your father used to say that poetry was a nice hobby but not something to take seriously. Do you miss—" The question hit me unexpectedly hard. "I do, more than I realized until just now. Maybe you could start again. You have time now and inspiration." The idea felt both thrilling and terrifying. "Maybe I could. I'd love to read your poems sometime, if you'd be willing to share them." After dinner we walked slowly to our cars, neither of us wanting the evening to end. The spring air was mild, carrying the scent of blooming trees and the promise of longer days ahead. "Mom," Chelsea said as we reached my car, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "All right. Do you forgive me for taking you for granted, for not seeing your struggles, for treating you like you existed only to serve our needs?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness wasn't something you could will into existence, but understanding could create the foundation for it. "I'm working on it," I said finally. "But forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. It's a process, and it requires change from both people." "What kind of change?" "I need to see that you understand the difference between loving someone and taking advantage of them. I need to know that you see me as a whole person with valid needs and feelings, and if I can show you that, then I think we can build something better than what we had before. Something based on mutual respect instead of unequal sacrifice." Chelsea hugged me goodbye, and for the first time in years, it felt like an embrace between equals rather than between a giver and a taker. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged in our relationship. Chelsea called regularly, but instead of launching into her own concerns, she asked about my classes, my reading, my thoughts on the books her book club was discussing. She sent me articles she thought I'd find interesting, shared photos of art she encountered in her daily life, remembered details from our conversations in ways that showed she was really listening. More significantly, she began including me in her life as a participant, rather than a service provider. She invited me to art gallery openings, to lectures at the university, to events where she introduced me as her mother, but also as someone with her own interests and opinions. Jake remained somewhat distant, but he was polite in a way that suggested he was making an effort to see me differently. During one family dinner at their house, he asked my opinion about a financial decision they were considering, actually listened to my response, and incorporated my suggestions into their planning. "Your mother has good instincts about money," he told Chelsea later, apparently forgetting that I was in the room. I should have asked her advice before. The comment stung slightly, because it revealed how little he'd considered my capacity for financial understanding, but it also represented progress from someone who'd previously seen me as financially incompetent. My college classes continued to be a source of joy and intellectual stimulation I'd forgotten I was capable of experiencing. In art history, we'd moved on to modern abstract expressionism, and I found myself drawn to the bold colors and emotional intensity of painters like Rothko and Paul. In literature, we were reading authors I'd never encountered, voices that spoke to experiences I recognized, but had never seen reflected in books. The financial management class proved most transformative. As I learned about investment strategies and retirement planning, I began to understand how much of my financial insecurity had been self-imposed, through ignorance. The instructor was a woman about my age who'd returned to school herself after a divorce, and she made the material accessible and relevant to our situations. "The biggest mistake most women make," she said during one class, "is thinking they're not smart enough to understand money. But money is just math, and math can be learned by anyone willing to practice." I thought about all the years I'd let other people make financial decisions for me, all the times I'd nodded along with explanations I didn't understand, all the opportunities I'd missed because I thought finance was too complicated for someone like me. With my newfound knowledge, I began making plans for the $4,750 I'd taken from Chelsea and Jake. Not spending plans, but investment plans. I opened a retirement account, bought my first stocks, started building a financial foundation that would ensure I never again had to depend on anyone else's generosity for survival. The irony wasn't lost on me that money I'd taken in a moment of desperation had become the seed money for long-term financial independence. 3 months after our dinner at Seasons, Chelsea called with an invitation that surprised me. "Jake and I are going to Napa Valley for our anniversary," she said. "Would you like to come with us?" "With you? On your anniversary trip?" "Not the whole time. We're going for a week, but we'd love to have you join us for the last few days. There are some beautiful gardens and art galleries I thought you'd enjoy, and I'd like to share them with you." The old version of me would have declined immediately, not wanting to impose on their romantic getaway, but the new version of me considered the invitation on its own merit. "That sounds lovely. I'd like that." "Really? You'll come? As long as you're sure I won't be in the way." "Mom, you're not in the way, you're family, but more than that, you're someone I enjoy spending time with." The trip to Napa was a revelation. Chelsea and Jake had booked separate accommodations for me, a charming bed and breakfast within walking distance of their hotel. During the days, we explored wineries and galleries together, but I also had time to myself to read, to write in the journal Chelsea had given me, to process the experience of being included rather than utilized. One afternoon, while Jake was napping by the pool, Chelsea and I sat in a sculpture garden drinking wine and watching the late afternoon light play across the hills. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, "about teaching me to see you as Leona Bailey instead of just Mom. And I realize I've been asking you the wrong questions all these years. Instead of asking how you were, I should have been asking what you were thinking. Instead of asking if you needed anything, I should have been asking what you wanted. What's the difference? Need implies scarcity, like you're asking for charity. Want implies desire, preference, the right to have opinions about your own life." I set down my wine glass, struck by the insight. "That's exactly right. So I want to ask you now, what do you want? Not what you need, not what would be practical, not what would help anyone else. What do you want for yourself?" The question was so simple and so radical that I had to think for a long moment before answering. "I want to keep learning. I want to write poetry again, and not apologize for taking time to do it. I want to travel, not to visit family or for practical reasons, but just to see beautiful places and have new experiences. What else? I want to have friends who know me as myself, not as someone's mother or grandmother. I want to make decisions about my time without having to justify them to anyone. I want to matter in my own life." "You do matter. You matter to me. I know. But I want to matter to myself too." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. For the first time in our relationship, I felt like we were having a conversation between peers rather than between a parent and child. "Mom," Chelsea said finally, "I need to tell you something. About the money." "What about it?" I'm glad you took it. Not because I wanted you to steal from us, but because it forced all of us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how our family handles money and power. How so? Jake and I have been seeing a couples counselor, partly because of what happened with you, and we've realized that our marriage was replicating some unhealthy patterns. I was doing all the emotional labor while he controlled the finances. I was accommodating his preferences while my own interests got pushed aside. What are you doing about it? We've opened separate accounts in addition to our joint account, so we each have money that's truly our own. We're dividing household responsibilities more equally, and I'm pursuing my own interests even when Jake doesn't understand them. How's that working out? It's hard sometimes. Change is always hard, but it feels more honest, more sustainable. I'm proud of you for doing the work. I learned it from watching you choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else. That evening, I sat on the small balcony of my bed and breakfast room, writing in the journal Chelsea had given me, not poetry yet, but observations, thoughts, fragments of ideas that might someday become poems. The act of putting words on paper felt like coming home to a part of myself I'd abandoned. When I returned from Napa, I made a decision that had been percolating for weeks. I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent to discuss selling my studio apartment and buying something larger, something that could accommodate a proper writing space and the life I was building for myself. The agent, a woman named Sandra with silver hair and practical shoes, was enthusiastic about my plans. The market is good right now for sellers, she said, and with your budget, we can find you something with character. Maybe a small house with a garden. The idea sent a thrill through me that I hadn't expected. I'd been living in apartments for so long that I'd forgotten the pleasure of growing things, of having earth to dig in and plants to nurture. 3 weeks later, I put an offer on a small craftsman house with original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a backyard perfect for a vegetable garden. The down payment was exactly $4,750. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The money I'd taken to assert my worth was becoming the foundation for a home that was truly mine. Moving day was a family affair. Chelsea and Jake helped me pack and transport my belongings, and for the first time in our relationship, I felt like they were contributing to my life rather than just accepting my contributions to theirs. It's perfect for you, Mom, Chelsea said, as we arranged furniture in my new living room. It feels like a place where someone writes poetry. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my new kitchen with a cup of tea and the real estate papers spread across the table. At 68 years old, I was a homeowner again, but this time the house belonged entirely to me. No one else's name was on the deed. No one else's preferences had influenced the choice. No one else's approval had been required. 6 months later, I hosted my first Thanksgiving dinner in my new home. Chelsea and Jake came, along with Patricia and 2 other friends from my book club, and my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly widow who'd become a gardening mentor. The table was crowded but not cramped, filled with laughter and conversation that ranged from literature to politics, to the best methods for growing winter vegetables. Chelsea helped me serve the meal I'd prepared myself, using recipes I'd chosen because I liked them rather than because they were traditional or expected. As we moved around the kitchen together, she said quietly, "This feels different than the holidays we used to have, more real, like everyone here chose to be here instead of just fulfilling an obligation." After dinner, Patricia asked if I'd be willing to share one of the poems I'd been writing. I'd been attending a poetry workshop at the community college, and my instructor had encouraged us to share our work with friends and family. I retrieved a folder from my desk and selected a poem I'd written about second chances, about the courage it takes to start over when you think it's too late. My voice shook slightly as I read, but I made it through to the end. The room was quiet when I finished, and for a moment I worried that I'd made a mistake, that my words weren't good enough to share. Then Patricia began to clap and the others joined in, and Chelsea wiped tears from her eyes. "Mom," she said, "that was beautiful. You have such a gift." "It's just a poem." "No, it's not just a poem. It's your voice. It's who you are when you're not busy being what everyone else needs you to be." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the gentle chaos of a successful dinner party. Dishes could wait until morning, leftover food was properly stored, and my house smelled like home in a way I'd never experienced before. I opened my journal and began to write, not a poem this time, but a reflection on the year that had changed everything. 12 months ago, I'd been a woman disappearing into the background of her own life, grateful for scraps of attention from family members who took her for granted. Tonight, I was a woman with her own home, her own interests, her own circle of friends who valued her thoughts and opinions. The transformation hadn't come from winning the lottery or inheriting money or finding a new relationship. It had come from the radical act of treating myself as well as I'd always treated others. Outside my window, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the garden I'd planted with my own hands in the backyard that belonged to no one but me. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own bed, in my own house, and make decisions about my day, based on what I wanted to do, rather than what others needed from me. I closed my journal and smiled, thinking about the poetry workshop I was teaching now at the community college, about the spring semester classes I'd enrolled in, about the small vacation I was planning to take by myself to see the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe. At 68 years old, I was finally living my own life, and it was magnificent. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.